Hello, everyone. Super excited to have you here, and thank you for joining me today, Jordan and Jen. As you know, we're all convening today to talk about one of my favorite topics of the year, which is where are we really going in 2022? What are the real top trends that we should all be taking notice of, and how should we, as data leaders, be thinking about the next 18 to 24 months and take that back into our day-to-day strategy. But before we go into talking about all of that, I wanted to start us off with this tradition that we have actually at Atlan, which is modeled on something that Thomas Jefferson used to do. So Thomas Jefferson used to hate small talk. And so when he used to host these dinner parties, he used to hate these like high level introduction, small talk conversations that people used to have. And so he used to host what he used to call a Jeffersonian dinner. And the way the dinner works is you would basically have a single topic of conversation. He would ask you these deep questions or like even questions that are supposed to make you laugh. And everyone basically goes deep very quickly into that one topic. And so, I know this is the first time we're all meeting together. And so I thought I'd kick us off with one of my favorite questions. So the question is, what is your data story? Why do you, like, we all spend a ton of time talking about data, doing things, many of us dedicated our lives to data. Why data? Why do you care? Why do you love it? Why, and maybe just to kick us off, because I know this is a new format for you, I'll actually share my data story and then, we can go from there. So my story is I actually started my career doing a lot of work in the data science for social good space. So I basically said, hey, there are these large problems like national level healthcare and poverty alleviation, and they don't use data, and it feels like they should. So let's go do something about that. And for me, one of my most impactful projects was when we partnered with one of the cabinet ministers in India to roll out this program for 80 million below poverty line women. To basically give them like clean cooking fuel. And they were trying to figure out a data-driven way to open up the next 10,000 gas centers across rural India to basically create accessibility across the nation. And so we had this like complex geoclustering algorithm. We used like 600 data sets and things like that. And it was basically pinpointing the exact location that you could open a center such that it's profitable, but it's also creating access for like 1 billion people. So my favorite moment, and this is really when like my belief in data became like so much more, was when I was with so the cabinet minister was super hands-on. Like I've never seen a data leader like that in my life. And so he was like, how do I verify this algorithm? How do I know that it's right? And then I was like, I'm not so sure. So he got us into his room at 10 a.m. on a Sunday. And he decided to go district by district. And he would basically open up our dashboard and look at the location that the algorithm basically predicted. And then he would decide to call up, and he decided to call up people on the field. So there were these field mechanics randomly in the ground getting a call from the cabinet minister saying, hi, how's it going? And then he would basically say, what locations work for you? What do you think? Where is there market activity happening and things like that? And he actually went like from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. We went district by district, verifying the locations that the algorithm was predicting. And almost always it was right. And so for me, that was like really the most powerful moment, like the ability to, centrally be able to take something that was a super bureaucratic process. It used to take like 2 years, like thousands of people, and still, you would never get transparency into this process. And really build something where you could actually create access for like 1 billion people in a profitable way. That for me was my data story. And that's why I do what I do. And that's why I believe in data. So that's my story. Jordan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. My story is not as altruistic, so I feel not fantastic. But yeah, so academically, I came up through pure mathematics. So as I was exiting grad school, you realize you have to get a job to support yourself. And when you're in pure mathematics, there's not a whole lot of options for you. But luckily, I had taken enough computer science in that time to get a job as a software developer. So I was working for a electronic medical record company out of grad school, and just kind of randomly got placed on a team that was doing a lot of work with data. And this was in early 2010. So they were also kind of in the process of taking their 30-year-old technology and converting it into more modern web-based interface. So I was in particular working on a piece of technology that was essentially syncing data between the centralized web hosted database and local Microsoft Access databases that nurses would take when they went out and gave care to people in their home. So that was just kind of like a very early introduction into working with kind of these data systems, and also a lot of the catastrophes that could happen. That's a really kind of poorly set up system. And we all knew it at the time too. We were like, this is just not a very good way to do it. But the gist was when you go to someone's house, you don't know if they have internet or not in 2010. I think today you could probably make some assumptions that you can probably, get better hotspot access on your phone or something. And they were also transferring gigabytes of data and stuff like that. So it was, a lot of images and stuff. So that was an early introduction. And then from there, I decided I wanted to do less software development and I wanted to work more with customers. So I then went and I worked with a number of companies that were all data focused. So first it was autonomy, which was focused on unstructured data and kind of enterprise search. And then that got acquired by Hewlett Packard. I went and worked with Cloudera for a number of years. At Cloudera, I got really into data science. So I ran the data science field team for a while at Cloudera. And then from there, I worked at DataIQ for about a year and a half. And at Continual, our CEO and founder is someone who I worked with at Cloudera. So he was leaving Cloudera to start a new company, and I had been in contact with him. And essentially it said hey, we think there's an opening here for bringing AI into the modern data stack. And so that's essentially how I ended up where I am.
That's awesome. Cool. Jen, do you want to go?
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, I must start by saying I'm in awe of both of you, and I want to be both of you when I grow up. So there's still a lot in my career I'd love to do. My angle in data is maybe quite different. I learned to code when I was 8 years old. I maybe should have spent more time outside, but I learned to work with BASIC. My family were big fans of data. I had grandparents and relatives that had been spies during the Second World War. So I spent my childhood tapping people's phone calls and that kind of thing. It was quite strange. We built a 30-foot antenna out of the back garden. But it's so interesting about data because we could log phone calls, and suddenly it opened up this new world of data for me. So I guess the roots where my childhood has been rather strange and rather eccentric. But what I did find was through data, I could have a huge impact. I'm actually not always a very confident person, but I find that if I know the data, then I feel more confident about being right about things. I also have done a lot of work in the more altruistic sphere. So I've done work using data science to help predict homelessness in people, to try and catch them before they fall. That has a huge impact in families. And also trying to do things like understand donors better. For example, who puts themselves forward to donate bone marrow and who's more likely to do that. And that has a huge impact in individuals as well. So I guess that's me. I'm so interested and I'm so excited about the impact data can have. And I wish I was in my 20s again, so I could start where you guys are all starting now on this fantastic career. There's so much happening. So Prakalpa, back over to you.
No, that's amazing. And thank you for sharing those stories. I think this is what excites me about data. As I think about the next, couple of decades, you can go on to say that all amazing things in the world, right? Self-driving cars, man on Mars, cure to cancer, maybe it's all likely to have a data team behind it, and super excited to share those stories and actually have hopefully a bunch of people who are going to drive that change today with us, who've joined us in for the roundtable. So everyone, we're going to actually start with something a little fun. Data Twitter has been buzzing through 2021. It's been a crazy year. It has been my entire life in data, I have never seen a year where there have been so many data debates about so many topics in one year. So we're going to do something fun. We're actually going to start with like a rapid fire on the topics that basically broke Data Twitter in 2021. And we're actually going to open it up to the audience. So we're going to do a couple of polls to actually see how we all feel about it. And at the same time, as Jen and Jordan, how they feel. So question, which side of the debate you are on? And the first, the first question, data warehouses or data lakes? Jen, Jordan, what are your thoughts? And one sentence on why.
One sentence. I kind of don't have a preference one or the other. I spent about 4 years at Cloudera working on data lakes. So they definitely are great when you need them. My one observation about data warehouses is usually that when you design workflows on top of data warehouses and the people who leave, or the people who made them leave your company, other people can pretty readily go in and maintain those. Whereas with data lakes, if you're maintaining Spark jobs written in Scala or Java, the expertise required to make that happen, to maintain that, is much higher. So I think the ease of use with data warehouses is super attractive, but there are certainly use cases where data lakes make a lot of sense too.
So you seem to have a preference for data warehouses then. Is that right?
if I was starting a new team from scratch, I would put the focus on data warehouses probably.
Okay, awesome. Jen?
I agree with Jordan. I do think the right tool for the right job is the way forward. So I have a crush on both technologies, both methodologies actually, data warehouse and data lakes. And it's about trying to work out what the end users really want and trying to make things easy for people. People want convenience. They want things good, fast, and cheap. And you can't have all three, so pick two. And I try and ask the customers, really the users, what do you want? And then I work backwards from there. So yeah, I have a crush on both. So they should have a third option, right? Which is both.
Yeah, and sounds like, this is like such an evenly split audience too, right? Like we're at like 51% data warehouse and 49% data lakes, but I can actually see some comments from Daryl and Ramdas about just, also the convergence, right? Which is, I think warehouses are getting closer to lakes, and lakes are getting closer to warehouses with new architecture paradigms like data lake houses that are starting to emerge. And so hopefully soon, we won't have to make a choice between one and the other. Awesome. So we'll go to the next one. Which side of the debate are you on? Dashboards are dead, or long live dashboards? Jen, do you want to tell us what you think?
I think it comes back to what the users need again. I do have to say that we should have another option, which is good dashboards. I have seen some terrible dashboards in my time. One customer wanted 200 charts in the same dashboard. I said, how are you going to even analyze and work with 200 charts all at the same time? Oh, well, we'll just squish them all on the same page. No, you won't, because as humans, our working memory is pretty poor. Our brains are designed to have ideas, but not to hold them. So we can't look at 200 charts all at the same time. So I think for me, it's about the right tool for the right job. And I think we can't always assume that dashboards are good and actually designed for what they're supposed to, because I've seen some awful dashboards. Okay. So over to you.
So
I agree with that. I think dashboards aren't going anywhere. They provide a lot of value to users who have high stakes in the company. I think really why you dislike dashboards is probably people are abusing dashboards, and they're starting to do things like data transformations and like metric creation within the dashboard itself. And I think it's definitely good practice to push that down into the stack. So that's happening, in the transformation layer before it gets to the BI tool. And you should keep your BI workflows very simple, right? We don't want to be creating crazy dashboards that again create a huge maintenance burden if that analyst leaves and now someone's maintaining that who doesn't know SQL and doesn't know how to make sense of what you've actually created.
Got it. Okay. All right. And so it sounds like we're actually all aligned in this. 85% of long-lived dashboards. So dashboards are not going anywhere. Looks like as long as they're, I think Jen made a great point, as long as they're really useful and they're designed in a way that that can actually help the end users. All right. Should we actually go to the third one? Python or SQL?
I'm a believer in SQL. And this is coming from someone who's worked as a software developer. I can code in, probably 8 or 10 different languages. I've written a ton of code. SQL is really the language of data. Not to say SQL will always be the best language for data, but I think currently it's the best language for data. I can take someone who is more of a BI persona or data visualization persona who doesn't know SQL, and you can teach them to be pretty proficient with it within a week or so. And I don't really have much hope of that happening in Python. So I think the ease of onboarding and also the ease of transferring work other people have done usually is pretty good. I also would say you shouldn't be creating SQL files that are thousands and thousands of lines of SQL. So you also need to practice some restraint and kind of understand and tackle your problem like you would if you were a software engineer.
What do you think, Jen?
I agree with that. I think SQL is the language of data. I explain it to business users as you're simply asking questions of the data. And when you explain to them even the simplest select star statement, they start to get it. And I think that's important. I used to be quite interested in the R versus Python debate, but that's really aimed at two different personas as well. I think Python is great for crunching through data and helping to clean it, but that's where I tend to see its job sort of ending in some ways for business intelligence people. If I can clean the data, get it to a good place, then the SQL comes in after that. So it's almost like a progression. Once the Python is cleaned, SQL isn't always really great at that. SQL is actually much better at giving people the answers in a way that they can understand because it looks just more readable.
Absolutely. And it sounds like we actually have a pretty clear answer in this one with 86% of our audience saying SQL and, some great comments as well. I think Alejandro sort of summarized it with SQL is the language of the modern data stack, in my opinion. I think with a lot of the cool things that are happening around SQL, hopefully we actually will get to a world where we can get to reproducibility and all of those cool things with SQL as well. All right. This one really, just was the craziest hot take last year. Data mesh, revolutionary or ridiculous? Who wants to take that first? Jordan, Jen?
Yeah, sure, I'll take it. I'll preface by saying it's okay if you believe in the data mesh. I personally don't. But don't feel bad about it if you do. I feel like, this idea of decentralized data access or federated access to data, it's not new. It's gone back dozens of years. It's not worked many, many times in the past. I'm based out of New York City. I work with a lot of, large companies out here. Historically in my career, I worked with a lot of banks, insurance companies, a lot of companies who are under a lot of regulation, a lot of, different compliance requirements that they have to do with their data. And I think it's kind of a ridiculous idea in that setting that you're essentially going to try to decentralize all your access because more than making data easy for users, they need to make sure that everything is secure and tied down and they're meeting all the regulations they're supposed to. So if you go in and you say, we're going to take your data organization and break it up so that like anybody can have access to any of the data they want, everybody's maintaining their own pipelines. Like that is, I think, like a worst case nightmare scenario for a lot of like CDOs in these companies. Because of that, I think the data mesh probably will struggle to get large enterprise adoption. And I think that will mean like long-term, it will struggle to really get like a solid footing. You kind of need buy-in. You don't need buy-in from like every large enterprise in a technology, but you need buy-in from like some aspect of it. And I think the data mesh has a lot of obstacles to overcome in that area.
What do you think, Jen?
I think data mesh is one of these terms that gets bandied around a lot, and it's used quite differently depending on what people are thinking that it means. So I think the way I look at the data mesh is in terms of its output. So what does it give people? And it tends to produce data and sees it as a product that can be used in a more enterprise data management process. The thing that worries me a little bit about that is if you look at something as a data product, you can be ending up in a data silo. And if the data is siloed, the analytics tend to be quite siloed as well. So I think that's really something that starts to bother me a bit about it. Like Jordan's mentioned, it's been tried and it's gone away and then it's come back again. And I feel I've been around the industry long enough that I keep seeing things come back in and out. I'd be interested in its sustainability, but I think we're quite guilty in the data industry of taking these terms, turning them into marketing concepts, and then they disappear. And that isn't really helping the businesses because, you know, we keep hearing things like the death of the dashboard. I bet you next year we'll be talking about the death of the data warehouse again. And it just goes round in these cycles and cycles, and you just think, can't we just solve the problems, which is problems of ingestion? How do we get data to where it needs to be? How can we clean data and make it accessible? Because that problem, despite the fact that the industry's been around for such a long time, we're still struggling with getting people clean data in a way that's easy to understand. That doesn't mean that business users aren't guilty of producing really bad data in the first place. So we talk about AI and we talk about data science, but what I see is people struggling with Access databases and Excel workbooks and Google Sheets all over the place. And God give me strength, someone tried to ask me recently to upload data from a PDF. I think, what's the process behind that? What's the question behind the question? How did it get to that state? And what do you want to do with it? And people can't answer you. And I think we need a better way of trying to help people to articulate what they want. And I think with the data mesh, I see it in terms of that output. What's it giving people? Is it solving a problem? Is it lifting people up in some way? And it's been tried and failed, but let's see, maybe it will stick this time.
Yeah, no, I think those are awesome points. And I think I absolutely agree. I think the biggest thing we're all guilty of in the data space is there's so much hype and everything turns into marketing content, and marketing content just means so many different things. And so I think there are actually some concepts in the data mesh which are, you know, the fundamental concepts which are actually kind of cool, right? Like, you know, distributed ownership, and, you know, like there are actually some kind of, you know, or data as a product, and what does that mean to like make it reproducible and reusable? And I think those are all some great concepts. But I think the one caution to everyone is, or all data leaders that I share, is just don't buy into the hype, because there's going to be a lot of hype for sure in the next year. And just, you know, think about it from first principles. You could very much achieve a lot of those core principles with a centralized architecture as well, right? And I think that just like thinking from first principles rather than buying to the hype is what I would what I typically think of is the right way as well. And this one, it looks like audience was evenly split. We were actually 50%, 50%. So that was that's an interesting one. Looks like we're all split. Final question in our rapid fire. The debate, this has been around since like the day I started working with data, centralized data teams or decentralized data teams. Jen, Jordan, does anyone want to take a shot?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's pros and cons to both. I mean, I've definitely worked with a number of customers who have done both of these approaches. In my mind, I think the right answer is centralized IT and department-specific data teams. the hardest part of data is usually understanding the business context behind it. And like when I'm working with a client, helping them with a new ML problem, it takes me several days to dive into their data and really understand the shape of it, what connects to what are the important pieces of it. And if you're on a centralized team, not working closely with the business, every time you get a new use case, you're losing like a week or so of just understanding the data. So on the other hand, you also don't want to I think go the data mesh route, which is like decentralize everything. So like people are picking their own tools, people are doing their own workflows. You want something that's easy for your organization to maintain. Things like metadata are super important in understanding what's important to business users and stuff like that. So like centralized IT stack, but then I think taking the data team and making them closer to the business is always a good thing.
What do you think, Jen?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the best organizations, most efficient ones I've seen, are the ones that employ really good business analysts who are attached to different departments, who talk to one another and communicate, and they help unblock the understanding of data throughout the systems, throughout the departments. You can see quite a lot of data savvy business analysts, and those are the ones that really help to keep things moving around the place, helping people to understand what the concepts are, but also helping people to understand one another's perspective better. I think in the organization, you end up with a lot of bystander effect. Data is everyone's problem, but it's someone else's problem and not really mine. That's because the sales guys aren't putting the data in right. Why is that? Well, that's because the interface isn't appropriate for them and they don't know how to use it properly. Whose fault's that? Well, it's IT's fault because we can't build proper interfaces because we don't have what we need when we need it. Well, whose fault's that? Then it's IT, and it just goes round and round and round. So the bystander effect, I think, is something I see a lot in organizations where it's everyone else's problem, nobody owns it, but data realistically belongs to everyone in the organization. So I tend to think that when we're looking at these problems, we talk about shadow IT systems. And I think we can end up with shadow data systems as well, the ones that we talk about big data, but we forget about little data. And that's the data running in spreadsheets that people are using to make decisions on. And I think IT departments can forget sometimes that these little silos of data exist, usually in people's laptops or their OneDrive or their Google Drive, and they're being used really effectively by businesses, but they're not part of a wider estate. And I think that can be part of a decentralized data team if people recognize that they exist. Unfortunately, for many IT departments, I think some business users will not part with their little empires of data stores. You will be prizing them out of their cold, dead blue fingers before they will actually let you have any access to those systems. I worked with one customer who swore blind that they had no Excel workbooks anywhere hiding data. I spoke to the business analyst honestly at the water cooler, and she said, I've got a spreadsheet to show you. And her spreadsheet was a spreadsheet that contained all of the details of all of her other spreadsheets. So when she got to the 5th tab of all these spreadsheets, I asked her, does the IT department know about this spreadsheet? And she looked at me, face of an angel. No, they don't. I just have it here. How do you look after this spreadsheet? She said, oh, it's in my email. Okay, great. Microsoft Exchange is not a document storage system. So what about the rest of the spreadsheets listed on the spreadsheet you're using to manage your spreadsheets? Again, face of an angel. Oh no, these are just on my hard drive, and there's so many organizations where that happens. So it's not so much as a decentralized data team, it's a decentralized data mini empire made up of individuals, and actually it would be a team if it was set up as such, but it's actually glorified data silos, which are in the form of individuals and what's running around in their heads. And trying to encourage people to share their empires is really tough because people don't like change. They don't like to be changed. and trying to encourage a change in working practices is one of the toughest things that there is.
Yeah,
So
100%. No, absolutely. And I think I think all of us who work with data have actually seen that challenge, right, across orgs. And I think the one interesting trend I'm seeing is actually this idea of a central data platform team and a central, almost like, I know they're traditionally called data governance teams, but I almost think of them as like data enablement teams. Like think of what, in sales, we have sales enablement teams. Like they're responsible for building, like, of course, metadata and, shipping standards and things like that, but they're also responsible for this idea of like data community inside the org, and building data community, because to your point, I think a core part of the core challenge with decentralized teams, the advantage is of course they're closer to business, closer to context, which is great, but then you end up like operating in silos. And so having a central team that can actually bring together the broader community of data folks across the org, which are operating in a decentralized way, is an interesting thing that we're starting to see pick up, that I've been picking up as a trend in the ecosystem as well. It sounds like we're all pretty evenly split, but I guess this is one of those existential things, which is, I don't think there's a classic answer. This is to centralized versus decentralized answer. It's probably both. And thank you everyone for actually participating so heavily. I'm loving the discussions on chat. So thanks for just enriching the discussion with all of your thoughts. It's super helpful. So I'm going to actually ask one question to Jordan and Jen, which is, what are the top trends going into 2022 that you are most excited by in the data space, and all of us data leaders should actually be thinking about or keeping on our radar?
all right, so the one thing I'm interested in is the impact that COVID has had on the data industry. Now, I don't know if you find this, but when COVID hit, lots of people started working from home, and I spoke to many leaders who felt a pressure that once COVID was over, that they would be measured by their success of handling the business under the pandemic. And how could they prove that they had taken the right and good decisions over things like business and data strategy during the pandemic? Basically, what would they do that would be high value and low risk, but still show success? And certainly I found people started to do data projects that had been lying around for years and the business had pretty much ignored. But since people couldn't be together, they had to work virtually. And that's when people started to work in data projects. So when COVID hit, I was exceptionally busy because suddenly people wanted loads of help with data. And some of those organizations didn't do well because they were doing tactical changes rather than looking at it as a more strategic objective. So fixing Excel spreadsheets rather than fixing the process that was producing them in the first place. So I'm most interested in the emergence of data strategy and more longer term thinking around data. I know this trend isn't on here, but that's something I'm starting to see, people being a bit more strategic in how they think of it. I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Awesome. Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think the top three things I'm interested in following are, the emergence of this metrics layer in the modern data stack, and then, what kind of evolves with real-time streaming and also with like application serving use cases. I think the modern data stack has made great progress in the past 5 years or so, and we've seen a ton of cool new products and innovative approaches to data in the modern data stack. But it's still kind of currently limited to analytic use cases, right? So at Continual, we're trying to branch out from that and start to say like, hey, with the same workflow, we can now start to do ML and AI. So we're trying to extend the value of the modern data stack. I think similarly, we'll hopefully see companies coming in, or we have started seeing companies coming in, especially on like the real-time stuff. You have like Rockset or Materialize who are doing some cool stuff with real-time analysis of data. But I think if this doesn't happen, then the modern data stack ends up kind of being more of a replica of what you used to do on premise, which was like, hey, you had your data warehousing stuff, you had like message queues for real-time use cases. Those were unattractive because it's a lot of moving parts, right? And people like the modern data stack because it's easy, because you can go to Snowflake, you can get started half an hour, an hour. And I think we need to continue that narrative. So we need to have continued innovation with ease of use kind of as the key differentiator in this cloud ecosystem. And if that doesn't happen, I think, you know, we're going to eventually kind of run out of steam, and that's not a good thing.
That makes sense. And you know, I can see actually we also ran a poll for the audience on what we think or what people think are top trends that they're excited about. I'd add to that maybe actually just this. I'd say for me the top two were the first is this concept of the data team as a product team, which I think is actually has some very cool concepts that you can bring into the way we work, right? I mean, with a product, like you don't ship it until people use it. You know, the metric that matters is actually usage and value that you generate. You know, you can't ship a product and say there's no documentation for the product, like you want your end users to use it, right? And so I think there are some like concepts that we can actually learn from product teams, and if we apply them well to the data team, and I think that's a cultural shift more than anything else. I think that's actually a trend that I'm super excited about. And the other is, and this is probably obvious, but you know, I've dedicated my life to this, but really this concept of like active metadata, which is, you know, can we stop having metadata in silos and actually use it to make tools and people and their lives better? Can you start thinking about things like, you know, in an ideal case, you should actually be able to take usage metadata from Looker and say 90% of my users log into BI tools at, you know, 5 p.m. on a Friday, and you should be able to take that and auto scale up and down your compute in Snowflake and update your data pipeline at 4:45, right? That's really where we should be able to go as you think about the almost like what a segment for metadata or a metadata orchestration layer should look like. And so that's something that I'm super excited about, to finally create that glue in our diverse modern data stack. Awesome. So I'm actually going to stop us having a one-way conversation, and I'd love to actually have some of our audience come up. I can see a ton of questions that I'm super excited to take. I can see one question, which I think is really interesting from Vasudev. Thank you for that, Vasudev. How to bridge the gap painlessly from the data 2.0 world to the data 3.0 world? I see this, like I see customers like sort of struggle with this all the time, which is, you know, there's this like 2.0 on-prem type, you know, complex world that they live in, and then this like new cool world of the modern data stack. Any thoughts on that? And I'd actually love you know, some of our attendees who might have had experiences also to share your experiences on chat so we can all learn from each other.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think there's not one answer to this question. You know, in my observation, a lot of modern data stack users tend to be newer companies who kind of don't have the technical debt of investing in a lot of older legacy systems. But, you know, especially recently, I have talked to a few large companies who are like Fortune 100 companies who, you know, as recently as a year ago, I caught up with, you know, some contacts, and they're like, oh yeah, we're still like talking about going to the cloud. Like we've been talking about it for the past 5 years. And I was talking to somebody recently, they're like, no, we're actually in the cloud now. Like we moved all our data last year. And he was like, we ripped the Band-Aid off. We just said like all our data has to be in the cloud. We duplicated all the data in the cloud. We're now migrating over applications. So it's just like, you know, once you get the data there, it's in a question of like, well, can you get the workflows over? Can you get your applications over? And you just, you know, it requires a lot of people to make this happen, and you have to do it in a really thoughtful way. But, you know, I think the right answer is maybe just you have to rip the Band-Aid off at some point.
What do you think, Jen? Do you have any other things to add there to Jordan?
Yeah, I think that for change to happen like that, where somebody somewhere makes a decision, you need two things in place. One is an executive sponsor who believes that this is the right thing to do. And the other thing you often need is a crisis that makes it happen. So I tend to see that happening quite a bit. Customers come to me after the crisis. My recommendation is that you get out in front of the crisis before it happens, because it's just going to be a matter of time. I do think that some business leaders talk and talk and talk, and they're actually leaving it long enough for the next CTO, the next CDO, next CIO to deal with it. They're just biding their time, sitting in things, making it look like they're doing something, when all they're doing is talking. And I think that is something I find personally frustrating. And that's when the crisis hits, because they've waited long enough. The crisis comes along, and suddenly they need to be that executive sponsor that gets behind it, and they may not be ready for that. So that's my thoughts on it. Better experience. I haven't seen that happen.
Got it. No, I agree with both of you. I actually don't have much to add to that. I think both of those things are super important as we think about how to really make this change from 2.0 to 3.0. I can see a question actually from Irez. Is that how I pronounce your name? Irez, do you want to actually ask us your question?
Yep. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to know more about active metadata, because I work in official statistics. We're kind of behind technologically, but we're working on metadata as catalogs and just trying to create standards. And this notion of active metadata, which maybe is less relevant to official statistics, but it seems to me quite important, and I really don't know much about it. So I'd like to hear more about uses or tools, or what actually you're doing with active metadata.
Got it. Okay, awesome. Jordan, Jen, do you want to take a shot at what you all think?
I feel like you're the right person to answer that.
I was thinking that too.
Should I take that one? Okay,
Yeah.
so my thought on this, and I can go, is I think that traditionally metadata has sort of been this like passive siloed system. Basically take metadata from a bunch of tools and then you put it into what you tend to call a data catalog, and then you basically say all my and in some ways you just add to the silos, right? You have one other tool. And that's not how people operate anymore today. Like when you're in a BI dashboard and you want to say, can I trust this dashboard? Or who owns this dashboard? You don't want to go to a separate tool and actually get that context. You actually want to get that context right then and there when you need it. And that's sort of in some ways the way I think about the future of metadata, like truly activating metadata. So the first aspect of it is bringing it together and making it intelligent and building lineage and all those cool things. But how can you truly take that back into the day-to-day workflows of people? A great day-to-day workflow example is exactly the BI example that I talked about. Or how do you give people real-time insights while they're actually writing a SQL query in their SQL IDE about other kinds of queries that people have written on the same data set and things like that, which is all really cool ways of using metadata. And the other, and what I'm really excited about, I think the industry is probably 2 years away from that, is really the true intelligent data management dream. You can probably think about use cases like cost remediation and automatically purging data sets that are not used, and things like that you can truly do if you can activate metadata. I think the industry is still a couple of years away from that, but I think that's the way I think about metadata, which is how do you activate it to actually make the day-to-day lives of people as well as the tools that we use in the modern data stack better. So with that, I think we have one last question, which I think is actually a great way for us to end today. It's from Laura. Laura, do you actually want to come up and ask us your question? Laura, are you still there?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep.
I think half of this question has already been answered a little bit, but I was wondering what data trends are exciting you most in 2022, and also what data trends are scaring you most in 2022.
So we'll probably take the second one because we've answered the exciting ones, but I love actually the question, what data trends are scaring you the most going into 2022? Jen, Jordan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, for me, I think I keep hearing the term data lake house. And I usually hear that, followed by, what is it? I think all that's done is confuse people. And I think it just muddies the waters for people who are already struggling with the whole terminology around the data industry. So I think for me, I think that term just tells me that we are pushing the data industry away from business leaders and away from people who'd actually benefit from it. So we can say things like executive leaders don't understand data, but we're not making it easy for them either. Even things like data hubs, I know that term has been around for a long time in the industry. So I saw that Microsoft recently were starting to use that for one of their technologies, and it was not timing with what people traditionally understood by a data hub. So I think people are getting very confused between the marketing and what that actually means. And I think it's been a good session this today, because I think hopefully we can help people to cut through some of that. I would recommend read the literature, but also when you're reading vendor material as well, just ask yourself, is that what the industry means, or is that what the vendor means? That's what scares me.
I don't have a fear to share. I'll offer a tip instead. So I think it's easy to get kind of lost in the weeds of like what's happening in the data world. So you know, is a warehouse better? Is a lake house better? Is a data lake better? Should we be using SQL or Python? I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you're in a position where you're helping bring value to your business. And so like whatever means are needed to do that, like that should, you know, if you're a data worker at a company, like that is your goal. Your goal is to do stuff that helps your business, you know, create more value, right? Maybe it's understand your customers better or push more sales or, you know, whatever it is. So like, don't lose sight of that in all of these discussions, that like you're really there to help your business grow and succeed. And I think if you're doing that, then you'll find that your career path is naturally just going to grow very quickly. And I think that's probably more important to people than like whether or not they're a Python expert.
I 100% agree actually with both of you. I think the thing that actually worries me the most is how much marketing is happening on everything. And I think what that's doing is it's taking away the conversation from the real thing that matters, which is how do you drive value? Like, I think we need to be having a lot more conversations about how do you drive, you know, a great culture in your teams? How do you hire? How do you structure your teams? How do you build like, you know, cultural rituals that can help you actually get your business teams to value, like things like that. And I think we're having far more discussions about, you know, performance and you know, boards around it and architectures and too much buzz rather than things that and I really hope we all actually collectively move towards like shifting the conversation to value and first principles rather than you know, getting carried away in the buzzwords. I totally and I think the fear that I have there is that we'll go into this cycle where people buy into the buzzwords and then they invest in these buzzwords. And then like 2 years later, everyone's like, oh, but we still haven't gotten value of data, which is sort of, you know, like the last couple of decades of data summed up. And I think we have a shot with the modern data stack to actually, you know, surpass that and actually get to the value that we've been all wanting to see. So I hope we don't mess that up. Awesome. I think we're actually, you know, we're coming to the end of the discussion today. You know, and I just want to thank everyone for taking the time. Judd and Jen, you know, if you'd be up to like hang around for like for a couple of minutes, I'd love to, like, if there are more questions from the audience, we can actually just open it up, keep it as an open floor for like, you know, just questions that people could have and that we could answer. If you're open to like hang out for like another 10 minutes with the attendees. Is that, do you both have a hard stop, or should we hang on?
That's fine. I can hang out for 10 minutes.
All right, awesome. So we can actually just open it up to the floor. I can see some hands raised, and we can you know, actually just open it up, and I'd love to have folks on. Lena, can we have maybe Bill or Khalifa on?
Yeah, 1 second. I'll bring them on.
All right. Khalifa, do you want to tell us what's your question?
Yeah, sure. The platform we are using is an on-premise platform, an on-premise data lake. And we always struggle to find a compatible piece as we build our puzzle of data lake, from metadata management to ETL, visualization. So most of the tools today are cloud native, and that's a challenge we are facing.
Jordan, do you want to take that? Or Jen?
Was there a question there? I don't think I heard a question.
The question was, they have an on-prem data lake, which is making it hard for them to find the other tools that can work with it.
Yeah, and if no, how do you guys, what do you guys propose for companies which are still on premise? How can we go for a hybrid model, for example?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a good question. You're kind of stuck in the 2.0 world, right? I mean, I think a lot of kind of like cloud, quote unquote, cloud native vendors, they'll have capabilities to offer their services, like either as a, either as a service in a, private VPC that you control in your cloud, or possibly on premise. So, I think if you're interested in a particular piece of technology, it's always worth just contacting the vendor and seeing like, what are the options? It's often something that's not like highly publicized, because like that's not a sexy marketing strategy to be like, hey, we're gonna install this on-prem for you. But they probably have some options to help people who are in that situation. And for a variety of like security or compliance reasons, companies may decide that like cloud is just not for them. So I'd encourage, like, if there are particular things you want that are on-prem, or that seem like they're not on-prem, like, get in touch and inquire. Otherwise, you'd have to restrict your like general search to companies that are doing on-prem work. And there's still a lot of people solving on-prem technologies. It's just like, that's not like what VCs are investing a ton of money in these days. So there's less marketing, there's less hype around it currently.
All right, thank you.
I think from my perspective, you need to do a few things. I see some comments. Daryl, for example, is right, to be an agent of change, and, look at, this is going to be a change management process, because it's not just a case of buying a technology and expecting that technology to fix all your problems, okay? That is the incorrect approach to take, because I think lots of organizations have tried that. And just because you buy technology doesn't mean it will be adopted, doesn't mean it'll be implemented. And it could be something that people end up trying to shoehorn into an organization that just isn't ready for it or won't accept it. So it's not just a matter, and I see this a lot, especially with data visualization tools. Hey, we'll buy this tool or that tool and our problems will go away. No, you've just added something that you need to implement in your business and make it successful somehow. So I don't want to suggest this tool or that tool, because it would be wrong to do that to the tools that you don't mention. But it seems to me, is it up to you in the organization to solve the problem of which technology you use? Because if you are the sole voice in that organization who's talking about all these different tools that you could buy, then you might find that you don't get the support for that. I suggest what you do is find horizontal business problems that affect different departments. Try and articulate those. Try and see if you can find solutions, but talk to an executive sponsor who can make that happen. And I say that out of concern for you, because I think you could end up banging your head off a wall trying to talk about technology that people are perhaps potentially not going to listen to you. And I say that because I've been in that position myself a long time ago. There's a problem in the organization where you can be a Cassandra. Cassandra is the Greek myth. Cassandra was destined to tell the truth, but if nobody listens to her, so if people know your mythology, you'll know the tale. And I think if you're the Cassandra in the organization, that can be quite difficult. And the solution to being that person who's talking about buying new technology is to try and work out what problems you're trying to solve and get buy-in from other people. Otherwise, you might find it's a really tough challenge. I'll leave that with you. Oh, thank you, Daryl. I've just seen your comments. Thank you.
Awesome. I think we have one more question. Bill, do you wanna come up?
Yeah, hi there. It's interesting point Jen's making about being Cassandra. I think in a previous organization I was referred to as John the Baptist, as in I was preaching the data governance and the need to improve the management of data, the use of cloud-based tools for that. But fell on deaf ears, and the person that came after me was the person that really got the credits. Which is ironic, but I think one things that I'm aware, I'm excited about is that seeing some of the ways in which the cloud native companies, the startups of this world, have their approach to data management, data governance, and the opportunities to bring that to bear in some of the more traditional, larger enterprise organizations. Because I kind of feel that what I'm seeing emerging from the sort of cloud native organizations is very much driven by, very sharp laser focus on what drives business benefit. So what are the aspects of data governance that will actually deliver a return on investment? And I think I'm wondering if the panel has kind of seen that switch happening in the larger enterprise companies where data governance perhaps been driven from a regulatory perspective, so it's seen as a burden. And if there's any examples where the thinking from the kind of startup world where good data management is seen as an opportunity, where that has been successfully delivered in a larger traditional enterprise organization where data management governance is typically seen as a burden.
That is a great question. Jen, Jordan, do any of you want to take a shot?
Yeah, I think it's oh, go ahead, Jordan, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to let you talk. That's fine.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I think it's an interesting problem. You make the comment about someone else gets the credit, and unfortunately, that's often what happens. You absorb the poison in the organization, and that has to go somewhere. It's almost like sucking up a snake bite. You've sucked up the poison and it gets regurgitated. So I think it's an important point about business value, because when I speak to customers, they'll say, we want to get business value. But at least one person a week will ask me, how do I get business value? But then you have to ask them, what do you mean by business value? And actually, very few people can tell me what that means. It can mean different things, different organizations. So are you trying to cut costs? Are you trying to increase your understanding of customers? Are you trying to serve your customer better? Do you know who your best customer actually is? A lot of people don't actually know who that is. I think also, which challenges are they trying to meet in the organization? So I think trying to dive down into what does business value actually mean to that organization is a really key thing. And if you can articulate that vision, then that will help you to bring around a change in the organization. Sometimes the business vision doesn't actually match what the data vision actually is, what change people are trying to get and what business value looks like. So those have to be aligned. And usually it's about serving the customer better in some way. And it could be even things like, yes, well, value to us means trying to save costs, and we will do that through automation. So it's almost like building a user story for a business analyst. That you have this role, this is what you want to achieve, this is how you're going to get there. So I'd go back and ask people to articulate more clearly what they mean by business value. And that means you can start to assign metrics to it. Okay, so you want to save cost, how much? You want to be more productive as an organization? Okay, are you measuring that in hours? Are you measuring that in people's salaries? What does that mean to you? And that helps you to think more about what success looks like for the organization. Because I don't know, I really want a big buzzer in my desk that I can really hit when someone says, how do I get more business value, derive business value from the data? I just saw something that goes, tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And I think, we'll actually close it out with this, but I fully agree. I think the one thing I've seen for sure is this movement of data governance going from being this like top-down bureaucratic process because of regulators to people realizing that you need to do this well to actually, drive good quality data initiatives. Like people are realizing that, 50-60% of your time in like the most expensive resources in your company, which are probably data scientists and analysts, are getting spent because you don't have like good data management practices. And we're absolutely seeing more and more of that getting adopted. And we can connect offline, Bill, and I actually have some great stories of large companies that are starting to adopt sort of data governance. The way I think of it is like from a community-led perspective rather than necessarily from a top-down boring perspective that normally people see it. But with that, I'm going to let both Jordan and Jen go. Thank you so much for taking our time from your busy schedules and joining us. Thank you to everyone who joined us today and just making the conversation so enriching. I've been loving the conversations on chat. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope that we all have a great 2022 with data. Let's make this the year that we start driving some awesome value of data. So thanks everyone. And with that, we'll close for the day. There's a feedback form that we shared in the channel. We'd love feedback. That will really help us make these better. And we look forward to see you all the next time we do this, hopefully very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.